Hello and welcome to my session, Evaluating a DH Tool, the first 18 months of the Gale Digital Scholar Lab and the future of academic corporate partnerships. My name is Chris Houghton. I'm Head of Digital Scholarship at Gale International, which means essentially that it's my responsibility to look after the Gale Digital Scholar Lab outside of the US and Canada. So to take quite a global view of the lab. The first thing that I think I should probably do is explain what the Gale Digital Scholar Lab actually is. And my story starts about 6 years ago in 2014, when we made the announcement that we'll start making available content from our Gale digital collections, such as Echo, the 18th century collections online, or the Times Digital Archive, on hard drives to academic researchers for data mining and text mining purposes. Now, this was a big deal for us because it was the first time that we'd done anything like this, and it was incredibly important for supporting the community because suddenly we understood, or we were able to understand who was using our data, and more importantly, how they were using our data. And by keeping in touch with scholars and academics around the world, we could really understand what was good about the data and what the issues were with using it, either within a text mining context or indeed other sort of DH projects. And by keeping in touch with academics and understanding their research, we were able to identify 3 common barriers to digital scholarship. And these were pretty consistent around the world. We would see these things cropping up again and again wherever we went. The first challenge was this, the challenge of getting access to relevant data in an optimized format. Now, this isn't my slide, this is actually Mikko Tolonen's slide, delivered at DH Nordics a few years ago, repurposed with permission. And this talks about a typical kind of project workflow. Where we come in is right at the start there. We're the kind of raw data. But as you can see, it takes a long time to clean up the data and get it into a space where it can be analyzed, and then you have to create the tools, and then finally you can output your results and finally write your research articles. And the bits that were really interesting to us were these bits at the bottom, the numbers at the bottom, where he says that 80% of the time was used for data cleanup and another 80% of the time was used for algorithms. Now, we looked at that and thought, well, is there any way that we can reduce these times? Can we take 80% and make it 10% or 8% or 1%? And that's been our goal with the lab all the way through. The next challenge is technical. It's a challenge of hosting all of that data. When we'd send the data out, it would potentially be 3 or 4 terabytes worth of data that had to be hosted, managed within an institution, disseminated, looked after, curated, etc., etc. Now, as many of you will know, that's an expensive process often. It can often be a bureaucratic process, and we'd hear that coming back again and again. And then the final and probably most common barrier or challenge to anyone looking to get into digital humanities was that the tools themselves can be challenging. Whether that was teaching yourself to Python code or code in Java, or even just kind of using a tool like Excel to do quite sophisticated analysis. What that meant was that the pool of people with the relevant skills to be able to do this kind of analysis was actually quite small. And if you wanted to, for example, get an undergraduate literature class doing some text mining, there really wasn't practically the time to spend 10 weeks teaching Introduction to Python before you could start talking about how to mine 18th century poetry. And again, we'd hear that one over and over and over wherever we went in the world. So what we tried to do was to come up with, hopefully, a solution. And this is what the Gale Digital Scholar Lab contends to be. This is what it is. It's an online cloud-hosted text and data mining research environment through which you can access a broad range of text from our Gale primary source collections. So Echo or the Times or the Financial or the Economist or whatever it might be. But more importantly, that data is now allied to powerful text mining tools for the very first time. All scholars and all users have the ability to construct custom content sets across their Gale collection. So it's only what you have as part of your institution, but what it means is that a scholar can put together a 17th century journal, an 18th century newspaper, a 19th century book, and a 20th century transcript. And they can bring those things together and analyze them in 5 minutes. I don't know why you ever would, but you could. And then as well as that, you have the ability to organize and manage your research. There's an awful lot of help and instructional materials to provide a framework to all of this workflow. And at every stage, we've tried to be transparent and give users the ability to export the OCR, export statistical data and visualizations at every stage in standard formats, so that you can use your data outside of the lab, either mix it with other material, or take the data and run your own algorithms across it. So the Digital Scholar Lab is about trying to solve those three challenges of access to relevant data in an optimized format, of somewhere to host the data, and of giving access to familiar, powerful tools. And talking of the tools, these are the tools that were available at launch in September 2018. There are 6 of them, a fairly even split between quantitative and qualitative. Subsequently, we combined together 2 of them. So the 2 leucine ones, frequencies and engrams, were pulled together to work as one tool. And you can see that most of these are open source, and that is what we heard again and again when we talked to researchers. Can you integrate tools with which we're comfortable, with which that are familiar to us? So that's what we did. There's one difference though, in that what we did is we put a UX, or sorry, a UI or a skin across all of these tools, so that you don't need to know any kind of command line coding to make them work. You know, if you went to Mallet today, you'd need to know how to Python code. What we wanted to do was make it so that all you needed to do was put 3 numbers into 3 boxes, and then you or me or anybody, no matter what our technical skill, would be able to create an analysis. And that's what the lab does. So, as you'd imagine, in that time, in those last 2 years, and indeed when we were beta testing it for sort of 3 years before that, we spent a lot of time understanding user characteristics and looking into user behavior, both examining the statistics behind the use of tools and content within the lab, but also going out, doing a lot of UX research, or focus groups and that sort of thing, to understand how people were actually using the lab. And I wanted to share some of that sort of data with you, so that you can understand how users are using the lab and see what that sort of says about DH globally. The first thing to talk about is the top level usage. In the last 2 years, we've had 158 separate institutions around the world use the lab for 6,344 sessions. They've done nearly 28,000 searches and have been on the lab for a little over 150,000 minutes. The geographic spread is what you might expect. There's a large number of users within the US and indeed within the UK. Now, that's probably for that is definitely for 2 reasons. One, obviously, those 2 areas have got established DH communities and DH centers within an awful lot of universities and institutions. But also, it's kind of a self-selecting list, in that those are 2 markets in which we operate most strongly, where we have sort of large sales and marketing organizations, as opposed to indeed other regions. But it doesn't tell the whole story. And if I sort of narrow it down to just the top 20 users, we see it becoming a much more sort of even distribution, where the US is still the highest country with users, and the UK is second, but now sort of China and Singapore and Australia are represented there. And this pattern exists within the top 50 as well. So although there are a lot of US users, not all of them are indeed heavy users of the lab. And looking at average user behavior, this reflects that. So there are a few institutions that use the lab an awful lot. And there are a lot of institutions that haven't used the lab very much. Now, that could be for a couple of reasons. It may be that they've recently come onto the lab. We've been having more and more people subscribing to the lab as time has gone on, or it could be that they've just had a sort of short trial of the lab, in which case they haven't had the time to sort of develop the research that other places might have done. But some broad statistics: average time spent in the lab is 24 minutes. Average sessions per institution is 40 sessions, which we're looking to increase. And average searches per session, nearly 4.4. So every time somebody logs on, they're doing about 4.4 searches. It starts getting really interesting, though, when we start looking at the characteristics around content sets. Content sets are the beating heart of the lab. They're essentially projects. They're what you're doing your research on, sort of thematic projects or whatever they might be. The total content sets created to date is a little over 4,000, and that comprises nearly 3.8 million documents analysed, which is a phenomenal amount, and we're really sort of happy about that. And that adds up to 925, in fact, a little bit over 925 documents per content set. Now, this, I suppose, was a little bit of a surprise for us. We thought originally that people would be looking to put in as many documents as they were able. The limit of a content set is 10,000 documents. We thought people would be hitting up on that limit quite a lot, but in practice, it turns out they were looking for potentially a more focused content set, something where they've been more critical about or more judicious about including the data or including the documents into that content set. And it's interesting to see how that's played out. And that plays out again when we look at the amount of content sets with over 5,000 documents in them. There's only 230 out of all those 4,061, so a little over 6%, I think that is, of people or of content sets have over those 5,000 there. So people are looking for smaller, more targeted content sets. And how do people create these content sets? How are they created? Well, the average searches per content set is 7. So people are taking around about 7 content sets, 7 searches for every content set that they create. And in terms of cleaning, the cleaning tool is utilized. We have a cleaning tool within the lab. It's utilized 2/3 of the time. So 1/3 of the time people aren't cleaning their data, which is an interesting thing to me. The amount of tools that are used are nearly 14 per content set. Now, that's not that there are 14 tools within the lab, more that they are, people might be using a tool again and again. They might be iterating a particular tool like topic modeling and running that again and again to get sort of a more sort of narrow set of results, or a more refined set of results, I suppose. How the tool use splits out. The most popular tool is Ngrams, which isn't a particular surprise, as that's the simplest tool, I would suggest, outputting things like word clouds and Ngram counts and things like that. Topic modeling is next, then sentiment analysis. Clustering and NER comes next, and then finally parts of speech analyzer. There's also this download. Now, download is it's classified as a tool within here. Essentially, that's when a researcher downloads a content set to be taken outside of the lab to run their own tools or algorithms across it. As I said, you had the ability to do. Now, it was interesting to me to see that actually that isn't used all that much. Fewer than 500 content sets have been downloaded as part of this use. So it's showing that the majority of people are actively staying within the lab and using the lab workflow from build to cleaning the document to analyzing and finally visualizing the analysis. So it's interesting to see that they're staying within the lab for that. And of all the people using the tools, over 2/3 of them use the default settings. So people aren't changing the tools particularly. They're happy to stay with what the default is, which is, again, I think something that maybe surprised us a little bit, but maybe speaks to the the level of researcher that are currently using the lab, and the inexperience of them potentially. So finally, I want to talk about developing the lab and where we go from here and how we work with the community to do it. As I said, the last sort of 2 years, I've been traveling around talking to libraries and academics around the world to understand what they want. And after every conversation, I make some notes and kind of, I've been going through that to get a broad impression of what the most common requests are. There are two that come through. The first is that people are looking for us to enable the teaching of digital humanities techniques, often in places where there isn't a tradition of teaching digital humanities or using these kind of analytical techniques. And over 3/4 of conversations that I have mention this as a request. The next one, far and away, is this: the ability, giving the ability to upload your own content within the lab and mix it with Gale content and run it through the pipeline. And I'm pleased to say in the last sort of 6 months, this is what we've done, developing both of these things. First of all, by developing a learning center, which is a kind of comprehensive contextual framework for the research process. But all of the content within there is created by practicing academics, either by academics within our team, digital humanities specialists who develop that material, or by commissioning material from outside. It's all pulled together and developed in a learning center designed by our instructional designer with the latest instructional design principles. And it's designed to provide a scaffold for the whole research process, i.e. the before, the during, and the after of using the lab. And the reason it's proving to be so popular, and it really is it's about explaining the why. So why would you use a tool, as well as what the tool is and how you can use it. So it's an incredibly powerful thing. There are sample projects within there that people can use as a sort of guide and as a template for their research. But this is proving to be incredibly popular in those regions and in those countries that don't have necessarily a fully developed digital humanities tradition and that are trying to develop it. So very pleased that we've made that available. And then the other thing that we developed is this content upload, where now you can upload plain text documents into the lab for content set building, cleaning, and analysis. You can manually enter document text if you want to, and metadata, or you can add and edit metadata in either individually or in bulk. But what this means is you can create mixed content sets with Gale data and run it through the lab cleaning and analysis pipeline. So the simplified pipeline, but you can add your own data to that. And again, that's hugely popular and asked for all over the place. So with my final sort of 2 minutes, what is the future of the lab, and what is the future for our partnership with the community? Well, it really is about partnering with the community, and as many of you will know, we try and sponsor as many DH events as we can, and really make sure that we're putting our money where our mouth is. But it goes well beyond that. We have worked and we continue to work, and I continue to look for projects where we can do this, where we can support funding proposals to build and adapt tools that can be made available within the lab and outside the lab, open source as well. You know, we're really interested in building these tools, whether that's GIS tools or network analysis tools or vector space, to really work on Gale data and other data and really kind of push the envelope. We're really interested in enabling academic collaboration through the lab. We know that a lot of these projects are multi-institution, and we want to make that collaboration available through the lab as well. Similarly, we want to make available kind of knowledge share, but especially around pedagogy. I spoke before about these communities that want to develop digital humanities, but maybe don't have the ability or the experience of doing so. And you know, what we want to do is to be able to facilitate the connections between those We also want to partner with institutions to give sort of access to their collections within the lab. This is something that we get asked for an awful lot, whether that's a sort of API link or some other format, but the ability to mine your own collections within the lab, and thinking about things like national libraries and that sort of thing. This is proving to be quite a popular idea. But we're really interested in partnering with the community in a couple of ways. I mean, to address specific kind of community issues, i.e. Anglocentrism. I mean, we've already seen that we get a lot of usage in places like the UK, Australia, and the US for the lab, but we're really interested in how can we enable and facilitate non-English and especially non-Roman character or non-Roman alphabet text mining. Can we facilitate, Chinese language or Arabic language or whatever? We've got partnerships in China and the Middle East, and we'd like to work with scholars to kind of develop the tools to be able to do this. That's something we're incredibly keen on. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, utilizing the lab and the archives with them to really help to spread that understanding of social issues. So whether that's things like Black Lives Matter or decolonizing the curriculum, but how can we use the vast archives that we have and the ability to analyze them and visualize them at scale to tell stories and to uncover phenomena within these particular spheres. So that's certainly enough to be going on with, and I'm aware of my time, so I'm going to stop now. But thank you for listening, and I'll look forward to your questions offline. Thank you.